All right, guys. Our next guest is just the best. Honestly, he is arguably the best analyst in the entire sport. His channel Full Reptile and his work on BT Sport is proof of exactly that, featuring some of the best previews and post-fight breakdowns in the game. Oh, and he's a former UFC title challenger, so he knows a thing or two about what he's talking about. The one and only Dan Hardy. Welcome back, and thanks for helping us preview UFC 257 from the War Room set. No less, with Fabrizio Verdum's blood behind you on the canvas. How exciting, man. Part of history. Thank you so much. How are you?
I'm really good, guys. Yeah, it's always good to be talking to you. We always have a good conversation, so I'm looking forward to it.
And if we do need to genetically recreate Fabricio Verdum in the future, you're the guy that people can come and see for a cheap price. You can get your own Fabricio Verdum today. Now, before we talk McGregor Poirier 2, dude, you did such an amazing job on the commentary desk the other day. How did it feel calling the action on network TV as the UFC was an ABC in the States, which is a big deal? People in Australia don't realize it's a massive, massive deal. And also, what did you make of the main event in the clinic Max Holloway put on? We had Alex Volkanovski on yesterday, and he says it's a case of the opponent in front of Max, that if it was him in front of Max, it would be a very different fight. Do you believe that, or do you believe that this new Max Holloway would put in a different sort of fight against the champ?
I certainly think it would be a different fight. Absolutely. I mean, there were technical differences in Max in the fight that were evident. And I think that's a result of his, lack of sparring. He's been doing a lot of play sparring. And I think more and more fighters are finding that really useful to kind of open up their skill set and help them relax when they're fighting. I just thought it looked so good. I've got to see that match again. I mean, the last one was so close. It was arguable you could score 3 rounds to Max. And I wouldn't judge. I'm going to watch it again a couple of times because now obviously it looks very likely I'll be breaking those previous fights down. It is a different fight. Volkanovski's always got that takedown threat, and there was no shifting gears from Calvin Kattar. He didn't adjust at all to Max, and that was maybe just because Max got out of the gates early, and that's very uncharacteristic of him. He's normally a builder. He normally takes a couple of rounds, feel you out, kind of get your timing and your range, and then he starts to pick it up. And that's why he was so good as a champion, because over 5 rounds he can just light people up. But that still was a whole new level. I mean, he stepped in the octagon with the highest striking record, at 2,100 strikes. The second place is Joanna at 1,700. It's crazy the pace that he puts on, but to better himself again and to hardly get touched in the process. I mean, he was a bit scratched up, but the mess of Calvin Kattar's face was unreal. And to answer the first question, it was just very surreal. I mean, I'm so in the fight in the moment that I kind of don't take into account that people are listening. I know that sounds kind of strange, but I'm having a conversation with DC and Anik, and I'm polishing the edges a little bit of the conversation, but you could hear me. I mean, I was told off for screaming too much and not saying something, considering we normally have Rogan on the call.
Yeah.
But it was surreal.
Do you always stand during fights, or was this just exclusive to Max Holloway and how good his performance was? I feel like that's one of the benefits of this sort of COVID world we live in. You've got more room to sort of move around during these calling these fights.
Yeah, I do certainly feel much better about it when there's not a crowd behind me. Absolutely, but it's I try and stay seated for the majority of it, because you got to think, if we're commentating into the early hours, 3 o'clock in the morning, fatigue does start to set in. You've been on air for 7 or 8 hours, and it just feels it can feel exhausting if you peak too early. And I've done it a couple of times before. You get halfway through the preliminary card and you've had some amazing finishes. Like John Gooden and I called an event that was 13 finishes in a row, and just to keep the energy up for that and to go from one knockout to the next, you have to kind of learn to pace yourself a little bit, especially when you've got a main event that is going to be chaos like that. So yeah, I mean, I try to stay seated for as much of it as I can, but no, I very rarely do stay seated. It's just there's just so much going on, and the chair doesn't give me enough movement. I'm limited on range.
Yeah, and I mean, it's funny because you had Max Holloway sort of staring at you guys, slipping punches and yelling things at you. So I really feel like the broadcast desk has become a big part of some of these classic fights, kicking into 2021. Now, let's talk about the big main event coming this weekend. Before we do, let's look at Dustin Poirier, Dan, because over the last 6 years, do you feel like he's plugged up those holes and sort of made those big improvements? And if we're talking about his improvements, Where do you think his biggest improvements have been?
Well, honestly, I'm hoping, and I think that his biggest improvements have been psychological, because his game has not changed a great deal. You know, you go back to his Mickelwright fight in WEC. It was like 53 seconds in the first round, and it was just constant punches. He never stopped, and that's kind of Poirier's style. You know, he's not a one-punch killer like McGregor is. So he has to approach the fight differently. He has to lean on the skill sets that he's got, which is aggression and pace and durability. And I will say certainly that Poirier at 155, he seems to be far more durable than he was at 145. It makes sense, you know, an extra 10 pounds. It looks like he's kind of packed some muscle on around his shoulders and neck, and that's going to help take some punches. But he seems to, I think it's more of a maturity thing, to be honest. You know, once he gets past those first sort of 90 seconds where he's a bit cautious, and sometimes he can get stung and hurt. Like, you know, Michael Johnson stopped him about, you know, I don't know how these numbers keep coming to me. Minute 24, I think it was on the clock.
Wow.
It's, you know, like it's there's a consistency in his game that's about 90 seconds, and Conor's going to try and exploit that best he can. And that's primarily a psychological attack, because you need him to be freezing up in the early minute. So that's the big question for me, is whether Poirier is going to be able to shut that part of his mind off and not respond to McGregor. And then, you know, if he can, then he can get the fight further and further into his areas, which is the later rounds and the scrappy dogfight where he's in your face and, you know, he's landing more punches than you are. Like that's a dangerous Dustin Poirier, because he can overwhelm everybody. And he's got much more of a ferocious pace than the likes of Nate Diaz. I would say he's got a bit more of a pop in his hands as well. So there is a possibility that he can wear McGregor out, but the first 90 seconds are crucial for him. And he cannot be responsive to McGregor's mind games.
Wow, what a great way to put it down. We have to also quickly ask you, how the hell did you remember that 24th minute thing? How does this come to you? Do you just like lay at night sometimes and some kind of crazy random fact that no one ever thinks of just comes to mind? Or does it just pop up? Does this something like, because people would be like, oh, maybe Dan Hardy sits there and prepares like these crazy facts, but that's not the case at all, is it? It just comes to you.
No, I don't know. Things just stick in my mind because I noticed something. I'm like, oh, that's around the 90-second mark. I mean, you know, I might be wrong. You know, I might have said that, and it might be, you know, like 136. But it's somewhere around there. You know, it's somewhere around there. Things that stick in my mind, especially if I've repeated it a few times. My friend was laughing at me today. He said it's kind of like the Queen's Gambit. I'm not sure whether you've seen that, which kind of spaces out and there's loads of mathematics going on the ceiling and stuff shifting around. It can be a bit like that sometimes, especially if I've not had much sleep.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we don't function as well as you do on lack of sleep. But I was going to ask you, when it comes to Dan, you mentioned the mind games, and that was like a big part of the story in the first fight. Conor was so much more aggressive with his mental games. And I know we got a press conference to get through, so we'll see how that all goes. But if this is a similar build-up to, say, the Cerrone fight, where there's a lot of handshaking and complimenting, you know, snake boots and snake jackets, do you think that kind of plays into, you know, Poirier's hands and makes him feel a little bit more at ease?
I don't think so. No, I think Dustin Poirier doesn't like him, and I think that no matter who McGregor shows up as fight week, I don't think Poirier is going to want to entertain him at all. So whatever McGregor does, his confidence is going to irritate Poirier. That's the thing that I think he finds most unnerving, is the fact that he's just so comfortable in those heated environments where most people start to crumble. And you know, Dustin Poirier is he'll grit it out and fight through that area, but McGregor just rides it. You know, and that's I guess that's the X factor when you're talking about fighters and mixed martial arts. The thing that stands out is how well they command that space, that pressure. It's, you know, a Super Bowl every time for a fighter. It's either do or die. And you know, a lot of people don't respond well to that, which is what makes the ones that do so special.
We saw a statement from Dustin Poirier, I believe it was last week, where he mentioned how, you know, he's looking forward to getting in there against Conor McGregor. And I'm just paraphrasing here, but sort of battling it out early and really going into that war. And it kind of raised some red flags for me, because I suppose the best way to beat McGregor is to sort of go through those first initial rounds and then sort of turn things on later on when he gets a little bit tired. Do you believe that that's what Dan is really planning on doing? Or is this all a part of the sort of, I suppose, build up and games before they actually get into the octagon?
You're referring to the main event still?
The main event, yeah.
Dennis said Dan, but I think you meant Dustin.
Dan.
Too many Dans in our lives.
You're trying to trick me here.
Yeah.
Sorry. It was 1:35 as well. I was a couple of seconds off, but
still close.
I was close. The Michael Johnson one.
Mm-hmm.
Failure.
I'm getting the wrong name of the fighter in the main event. You'll be fine.
9 seconds. I remember those 9 seconds.
Yeah.
So the question was about Dustin Poirier and about his statement about battling through the early rounds and getting it into deeper waters with McGregor.
Yeah.
I mean that might have been more of a mental state that he has to be in, more than standing in the pocket and trading. You know, I think he's got to put himself in a mindset that he's going to take a few punches in this fight. He's got to be comfortable with the fact that he's going to get hit, and it's going to be uncomfortable at times. And he's going to have to be cautious, you know, with his defense, especially for the early parts of the fight. So that might have been more of a statement of his mental game plan than anything, because I think the safest and smartest thing to do is for him to like intelligently disengage for, you know, the first couple of rounds and just kind of chip away at McGregor safely as he's coming in. You know, Poirier's got good footwork as long as he doesn't get drawn in. He's got a great jab. He covers distance well as well, moving forward and backwards. And we saw in the Jim Miller fight, Eric Koch fight, like he's chopping in with low kicks, you know, especially with two southpaws facing each other. That lead leg is so vulnerable. You've got the tibial nerve that runs down the outside. As soon as that's a couple of times it has been kicked, we lose mobility in that lower part of our leg. And McGregor plants all of his weight on that lead leg. So if Poirier can dig a few of those in that first round as he's moving away, it considerably diminishes McGregor's ability to move forward, to throw his biggest power shots, and to even use his kicks to cut the octagon down. But you know, it's that psychological game. You know, it's can he not get drawn in? Can he not freeze up and leave himself vulnerable? You know, right in the crosshairs of McGregor's left hand. Because the reality is, if that happens, he'll fall just like he did at featherweight. I don't think weight class is an indicator of power for McGregor. I think that is transferable all the way up. The difficulty they had at 170 with Nate Diaz is because, you know, he's like a floor standing punch bag. Like you've seen those cheap inflatable punch bags that they've got a weighted bottom and you hit them, they just bounce away and then come back. Like, because he's got such a long base, like as you hit him, he just kind of rolls away from it, like trying to beat up a carpet. So, you know, that's a very frustrating thing for McGregor because he's a headhunter. He had to diversify his attack a bit more in the last one. So there are certain things that Poirier can do well, but being able to ride that punch like Nate Diaz instead of freezing up like he did the first time, he's going to be a big part of it, and that is the psychological game.
It's interesting that you mentioned the leg kick stand, because Bas was on this show, Bas Rutten, and he was actually demonstrating. He sort of stood back and he showed how with Conor's sideways sort of bladed stance, it very much leaves him open to the leg kicks, and in a way that he can't really check them, especially if they come, you know, from behind him. I'm wondering, and we saw Dustin actually employ arguably the most leg kicks that anyone's ever attempted on Conor. But I'm wondering, why do you think no one's had, you know, a ton of success against Conor with the leg kicks? It seems like, I don't want to say the obvious strategy, but it seems like you mentioned one that's kind of right there. And how do you employ something like that against McGregor without, you know, getting countered by some of the lethal punches that he has?
Well, I think, it comes down to stance, because most of the people that McGregor's faced have been orthodox fighters, and it's much more difficult to throw kicks to that lead leg unless you're either throwing power kicks to the inside lead leg, or you kind of skip him forward and dig in the calf kick, which leaves you in a very, very vulnerable place for that left hand. And, you know, McGregor's quite happy to use that lead hand to either set it up with a punch or to catch a kick to fire that down the pipe. You know, he's very good at catching kicks. We saw him land takedowns off Max Holloway in the first round. So, third round. You know, there's an inherent risk if you're opposite stances throwing low kicks. You have to really consider the setup, which is much easier to do if you're moving forward. So, you know, if McGregor was moving forward, he's got a variety of kicks he could throw against an orthodox fighter. But if Poirier is circling away and trying to stay away from the left hand, it's going to be very difficult. You know, it's going to be much easier for him to throw the low kicks than it would be for other people under pressure, because they're going to have to try and skip, and there's kind of a sticking point there, and you leave yourself in the center line. It's just very dangerous. So I think that's why most people don't, because they're aware of that danger. Whereas Poirier be in the same stance. As the rear hand's coming forward, he can lean across the center line and chop into that lead leg, or he can step across to the outside and cut up the inside of the knee. There are two good options there that both dismantle the base of that lead leg, which nullifies the punch anyway, and it gets his head off the center line. So even if the left hand does get fired out, it's not going to do a great deal to him. And we know that McGregor doesn't need that back foot planted for the left hand, but he definitely needs the lead foot planted because all of his weight's on it. I mean, the first punch he threw against Cowboy was literally like a lunge. It was like a forward lunge left hand. Nearly 100% of his weight was on his lead leg. It's the most vulnerable target if you're facing him, and Poirier's got an advantage given the fact that he's the same stance.
Man, it's such an exciting fight. Obviously, McGregor hasn't spent that much time in the octagon. We saw with Cerrone, he was relatively quick. And I guess that is always the biggest criticism that he's gotten as the fight moves on, as you get past the first couple of rounds and you go into those third, fourth, fifth rounds, he has a tendency to sometimes slow down. But apparently this is the best Conor McGregor that we've seen in a long time. He says he beat the previous versions of himself. What kind of Conor McGregor do you think we'd see if Dustin goes through those initial couple of rounds? And is there a mental side of things that could affect Conor from the perspective of before he was able to put him away so early, but if Dustin can withstand some of that storm and some of those initial rounds, will there be sort of a mental thing that Conor has to deal with now that sort of Dustin has survived and made it all the way through to later on in that fight, if that does happen this weekend?
I suppose that's all dependent on whether he's bluffing about his condition or not, because the truth is only he knows how hard he's been pushing himself, and he knows how deep his lungs are. So if it does start to get into the deeper rounds and he doesn't have confidence in his conditioning, then we'll start to see him unravel a little bit, because we'll start to get the panic reactions, like shooting a double leg on a black belt. There are certain things that you kind of throw logic to the wayside when you're fatigued.
Start talking to Dustin on the cage. Take it easy. This is for charity.
Friends. You'd really like me if we watch the fight together. I think that it really depends on his confidence in his conditioning. I mean, that's the reality of it. If he's bluffing, if he doesn't believe that he's in good condition, then we'll see that as he starts to get tired. Whereas he may look tired at certain points in the fight, but if he's confident in his conditioning, he'll still work through it and he'll work around it. Because there is a difference between Dustin Poirier and Conor McGregor. It's the difference between a powerlifter and a marathon runner in a closer spectrum, but still the same kind of spectrum. Like McGregor can fire that left hand with loads and loads of power, but he's only got a certain amount of times he can do it. Like there's a physiological taxation on his body, because it takes so much muscle fiber contraction to create that much energy. Whereas Dustin Poirier, he's on the spin bike, he's on the air dying, he's bang, 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 bang over and over again. And all of his muscles firing, because he's not landing with the same kind of power, there's less energy expenditure, which means he can throw more. So Conor has to manage his energy regardless of whether he's in good condition. He can still punch himself out just because that's his physiological makeup. I certainly think he's going to be in excellent condition, though. I don't see any reason why he wouldn't be. I was discussing it with my old conditioning coach earlier, Ollie Richardson. He was saying, what does he have to do? He wakes up, he's got a calorie-controlled breakfast, he goes to train, everything's taken care of for him. He gets his post-training shake, fully balanced electrolytes and everything. I mean, he's basically a NASCAR. They're finely tuning him, and he's just able to be a student. I mean, it takes so many things off the table. The fact that he's got the finances to do it. I expect the best version of him.
100%, and he looks extremely jacked in his Instagram posts. I also wanted to ask you, with Dustin, you talk about Dustin wearing out Conor McGregor, and there's kind of this notion that, well, maybe Dustin should just go for the ground, try and get Conor McGregor down there, wear him out there, and, if we're looking just purely at numbers and stats, which don't tell the whole story, Conor's losses have come via, submission. But do you think that Dustin kind of has the wrestling savviness to get in on Conor, who is so good at distance management, and Dustin's takedowns, they sort of come from the pressure, which is going to be the hardest part in a way for Dustin? What do you think about this notion that, well, Dustin should just take it to the ground?
I don't think it's that easy for him. the takedown offense that McGregor displayed against Khabib was impressive. You know, even though he was grounded, he did. I mean, that first scramble was about 45 seconds long. Most people don't stay standing that long against Khabib if he decides they're going down. I think McGregor's takedown offense and grappling is going to be on par to be able to keep this fight standing. And then that's when there's a psychological impact on Poirier, because if he feels like his best route to victory is a takedown, then that doesn't happen. That means he doesn't have a choice but to stand with McGregor. Whereas it's kind of an ace in the back pocket, even if in actuality it wouldn't work. If he thinks, well, you know, if he keeps pressuring him, I can always take him down. That facing the reality of not being able to in the first round might be a scary thing for him, because he might not be able to do it. And then he has to face McGregor on the feet, and that's just going to make him more tense. I don't think it would be a very good use of energy, to be honest. I think he'd be far better playing the long game and chipping away at McGregor. You know, there's no reason why he needs to rush in there. There's a reason why we have fights over 5 rounds. You know, when we're getting close to championships, is because it changes the dynamic of the fight. Like over 3 rounds, we can get an unclear winner. You know, you think back to the Dustin Poirier Dan Hooker fight. That was a 3-round fight. If we call that on the scorecards at 3 rounds, Hooker's probably 2 rounds up. But what we realized after the 4th and 5th round is that Hooker's not quite ready for championship fights yet. You know, he's tough and he's durable, but he doesn't have that perhaps maturity to adapt over 5 rounds. Because, you know, the thing is, and I'm not in any way criticizing him, because he's an excellent fighter, and I think Chandler's going to have to test his mentality and his maturity in this fight, because I know we're kind of jumping around the card a bit. That's here. Right. Forgive me. The thing I've noticed with Dan Hooker is he's excellent until he gets drawn into the fight, a little bit like Poirier, a little bit like Felder, which is why they were such fun fights to watch. Because, you know, you at the end of the first round, it looks like the end of the third, and it's a bloodbath, and they're both sweating and gasping for air. Like Poirier had his hands on his knees at the end of the 2nd round. You know, it was a wild fight, a wild pace. But he started off really well. Jabs, low kicks, moving around, picking him off. And he's got the range and the height to be able to do that to Poirier. But he gets too excited and he gets drawn in. And, you know, that's the difference in mentality of when you know you've got to fight over 5 rounds. That I always say this to young fighters if I'm chatting to them, like, you can't war in the first round. That's never, ever game plan A. War, I mean, use the W. War should be game plan W. Like, you should have options all the way through, and you should exhaust all those options all the way to war. War's the final solution, always. Because, you know, as Max Holloway kept saying on the broadcast, and I didn't realize what he was talking about until later, protect your chickens. You know, we've got to be smart about this. Like, Max Holloway not sparring heavily in training camp has really showed in his fights. I would argue that same thing with Conor McGregor. He's made a career on being efficient and playful, which is probably what he's learned against Artem Lobov, because they're good friends and they've got playful sparring sessions and no one's trying to kill each other. So, like, having the ability to try new things all the way through the fight and to, this route of attack's not working, let me try and circle in this way and work this body kick, or, you know, such and such. Like, they're all the options that you should have. And for me, fight IQ is basically that array of options. If you've got low fight IQ, you've maybe got A and B. And A might be moving jab and B's war. And that's not enough. You know, not at a high level. You've got to level up when it gets to championship fights. So stretching it over 5 rounds, it really shows who's got the minerals over the distance, and, you know, who's got the maturity to hold a belt.
100%. I like war being the final option. That's fight advice and also life advice. I want to ask you one more thing about this fight, and then I do want to get your thoughts on Dan Hooker and Michael Chandler, Dan, and then get out of your hair. But obviously, Khabib is very much a part of the storyline heading into this fight. You know, there was the meeting with Dana White, which, I don't know, some people took something from it. Some people think it was a complete non-story. And I'm curious what you think about that. But also, Khabib's presence on the island. I wonder, from a mental side of things, do you think that has anything, any kind of effect on Conor McGregor? The fact that Khabib now says that he's going to be watching these fights. The fact that he I don't know if he's still on the island, but even the fact that he was sort of around, given the bitter and intense rivalry that they had and how much of Conor's life it took up, do you think it plays any factor, even in the lead up to this fight?
I don't think so, to be honest. I don't know whether McGregor will be really considering the fact that Khabib's there. You know, his name will come up in interviews and stuff, but McGregor's very linear in his thinking. I think he knows what he wants to achieve, and that's evident in what he's already accomplished. I think he's focused on Poirier, and I think he's not necessarily looking past Poirier, but he knows that Khabib's there as a viable option, you know, if he performs. But he always knew that there was that provision there for Khabib. Like, if McGregor squeaks out a decision over Poirier, why would Khabib come back to train? Like, he's 29-0. Like, he beat everybody that was worth beating at least once. I mean, like, why would he bother coming back unless there was something impressive? The thing I respect about Khabib in his interview with Dana is that he mentioned Charles Oliveira. And that, for me, shows he is paying close attention to this division, because a lot of people are still writing him off, even after he dismantled Tony Ferguson. Like, he's the guy to watch in this division. I mean, you know, we did a show on BT Sport the other day, and I was kind of playful in some of the picks that I made, which I took a lot of heat for online, because I think some people were thinking I'm being serious.
Which you usually do anyway, so there's nothing.
Yeah.
Just another day in Hardy's life.
But you know, I think of all the picks I made, you know, he was the one I was deadly serious about. I mean, he could absolutely be champ at the end of this year, because he's got all the skills. You know, his submission game is unquestioned. His striking game is coming up leaps and bounds every time we see him. And everyone thought that Tony Ferguson would be the antithesis of Khabib, because he's got sharp elbows and weird attacks off his back. But the reality is, Charles Oliveira is just a better version of Tony Ferguson. He's the smarter version of him. You know, I mean, you got Tony Ferguson wrestling a hot tub on his Instagram, and you got Charles Oliveira working diligently on his you know, guard passing. There's a big difference. I think the thing that will draw Khabib back is if he feels like there's something to prove against one of the contenders. And McGregor's got to look fantastic and probably beat somebody else, maybe even beat Charles Oliveira to get that shot. But you know, it's funny because they've actually moved Khabib's relative onto, is it his brother? Moved him onto the Wednesday card, just so they're not crossing paths too much. Oh. And my Raptors are out in Fight Island still, and they got a situation where McGregor had just walked into the hotel just as Khabib was walking through the lobby as well. They missed each other by about 90 seconds, from what I understand. So, I mean, you know, it's tenuous, still time, but I don't think McGregor would be phased.
I love that. I love Dana White. I love it because Dana White's like, oh, those guys will not be crossing paths. And the second he gets in the hotel, he was 90 seconds away from crossing paths with Khabib. So that's hilarious. Just quickly on Khabib and Conor. I mean, lastly, when you spoke to us last time about how if Khabib sticks around, Conor's days as champion might be over. If Khabib doesn't ever return, which is a very real possibility, do you think that changes? Do you see Conor becoming champion again at 155 in a Khabib-less division?
I mean, he's going to get more opportunities than everybody else. There's no doubt about that. I mean, what's this? His third fight in the division. It's the only one that's not been for a title. Like, you know, he finds himself in very lucky situations because of his marketability. So, and everybody in this division knows that, you know, if you're going to fight someone and make a big chunk of cash, it's going to be Conor McGregor. So, I mean, he's always the money fight. He's always the person that's worth hanging a belt on, because he's going to draw the pay-per-view buys and the viewers. He's got the chat, he's got the swagger. He's got to perform though, and that's the reality of this lightweight division. And like, McGregor is definitely one of the top contenders in this division, but that doesn't by any means mean he's head and shoulders above the rest of them. Like, you could even pull guys from lower down, the likes of Islam Makhachev. You know, you give that guy another 12 months and a couple more wins, and his confidence is really going to come in. And, you know, like, he's not in the shadow of the big tree anymore, you know. Like, Khabib's not at the top of the division holding him back. There's nothing to stop him taking the sprint at that belt. So, like, there are lots of guys that could cause McGregor problems. Just because he might be able to win the belt, it doesn't mean he's not going to have to work hard for it. That's why I'm excited to see him back at 55, because he's not a 70-pounder. He's just not. I mean, like, you watch me interview him in Dublin after he faces Dustin Poirier, and he's Diego Brandao, and he's much smaller than me, like, stature-wise. I think 55 is the right weight class for him. I mean, I'm not a big 170-pounder anymore compared to some of these monsters. Like Neil Magny's like 7'3" with a 94.
He's actually the Undertaker. People don't realize.
You even have to Max corner to punch you in yours.
Yeah. That's right. As if this weekend doesn't have enough fun fights as it is. And by the way, I want to chat to you in a second about Dan Hooker and Michael Chandler. The only thing that makes this better and this weekend better is making a few bones of putting down some bets on your favorite fights, watching juicy knockouts and highlight reel KOs and fun fights, and then making a few bucks off it. There's only one place you should go for that feeling, and that is mybookie.ag. Isn't that right, Dennis?
That's right, Cass. There's only one place, like you mentioned. MyBookie has better bonuses and more MMA odds than any other sportsbook, period. And more importantly, they are the only sportsbook submission radio recommends when you win, they pay fast. So make sure to sign up with promo code submission. MyBookie will match your deposit halfway up to, that's right, $1,000. Visit MyBookie online today. That's MYBOOKIE. And don't forget to enter your promo code submission now.
That's right. And while we have this bipolar weather here in Australia, it is technically summer, and you know what that means. Shave your beans, man. Shave your freaking balls. Shave your back. Shave wherever you would like with Manscaped's Lawnmower 3.0, the best grooming tool on the market with its LED light. It is waterproof. You can do it in the shower. Just part of your routine. 7,000 RPMs of power. Skin-safe technology, so, you know, it won't cut one of your nuts off. And they sponsor the UFC, and they sponsor fighters such as Max Holloway and Francis Ngannou. He probably needs an extra large Manscaped Lawnmower 3.0. Isn't that right, Dennis? Oh, and use the code submission for your 20% off discount.
Yeah, man. Listen, people would remember my Tom Hanks castaway beard. Well, Manscaped were the people to go to. They were able to help me get rid of this bad boy. I used, of course, the Manscaped Lawnmower 3.0 to shave it down and get rid of it. Go to manscaped.com, use that code word submission, 20% off and free shipping today.
By the way, if you're ever struggling to watch fights on certain channels, maybe you didn't get the fights in your country, maybe they're blacked out for whatever reason, maybe you're in Australia and you can't watch Bellator. People are always asking us, how do we watch Bellator? Or especially this weekend when you want to watch the fights. It is as simple as using PureVPN, the best VPN in the world, to change your region and make your computer think you are in a different part of the world where you can watch the fights. You can watch things like ESPN or BT Sport or Globo or any sporting channel in the world. The same goes for movies. You can be on your Netflix, log into your account, and then watch it from a different region. And they are giving away a great deal at the moment where it's just 99 cents for a 7-day trial. You can see if you like it, or 47% off for 1 year. Actually, that includes 47% off for 1 year. Or if you go for 2 years and you do like it, it is 70% off. And if you use the code submission, you get an additional 10% off. Isn't that right, Dennis?
That's right, man. Listen, sometimes you buy the pay-per-view, but you want to check out one of your favorite fighters in the prelims, but the prelims aren't available in your country. So you got to wait till after the event, check the prelims out later. So get that PureVPN going so you can check it out through your Fight Pass or through a channel in your local country that you can't have access to because you're traveling. PureVPN is the place to go. That's http://link.purevpn.com/submission. Use the code word submission now.
Now, Dan, it's funny how you mentioned war is sort of never the first option. This could very well be the reality in the first round with Michael Chandler being very, very explosive and very, very aggressive in that first round. How do you see Dan handling that? You know, with his reach, with his stiff jab, and sort of looking to, I guess, slow things down. He told us that he's looking to sort of wear that early storm, and then Dan feels like from then on afterwards it'll be kind of easier for him to control the fight.
Yeah, you know, I mean, that might be the smart thing to do. There's going to be a lot of nervous energy in Chandler. You know, he's been building up this UFC debut in his own head. You can guarantee it. Of all the fights he's had, you know, earlier in his career, there's always been a goal to get to the top. And, you know, no disrespect to Bellator and their champions, but if you could be a champion at Bellator, but you have to be the best in the UFC to hold a belt. And that's just the reality of it, I'm afraid. And, like, Chandler knows that, which is why he's still climbing up the tree towards the UFC title. So there's going to be anxiety attached to that. Dan Hooker's a young veteran in this division. He's been around he's fought some hard-nosed fights, and he's going to be comfortable in there. And he's going to feel like he's welcoming Chandler into a place that he's not familiar. There's definitely, you know, certain things he needs to watch out for in the first round. I mean, the explosiveness of Chandler crosses over to his striking as well as his takedowns. I also think he brings a new dynamic to wrestling in this division. We don't have many big power double wrestlers at lightweight. Most of them are chain wrestlers. Most of them will take you down against the fence and keep mauling you. And, it's a different style of wrestling. And I would say that Dan Hooker's takedown defense against the fence is much better than out in the open. Out in the open, he's there to be hit and taken down. So, like, strategically, he's got to think about where he is in the octagon. If I was him, I'd be skirting the edge and forcing Chandler to shoot me into the fence, so I can at least use that as part of my takedown defense. But, this might be different to the Poirier fight. It might not be about winning the first two. And this is a 3-round fight as well. I could talk forever. There's so much to think about with these. It's a 3-round fight. He only needs to win 2 instead of 3, like he would over 5. So I would say, even if he does have a rough first round, he might be able to pace himself and then take the second and third off Chandler. But he's still gonna have to work hard because it's 3 rounds and Chandler's supremely conditioned. It's a good fight. It's a tough fight for Chandler because it's his debut. It's a tough fight for Dan Hooker because stylistically he gets drawn into positions where he could be exploited by Chandler's explosivity. But there's no doubt that knee up the center, good footwork, and a good jab, as you said, would do him a real good service in the first round.
Yeah, that knee up the center, man, the way he times it is unbelievable. And he mentioned to us as well that a lot of things he's unhappy about with that Dustin Poirier fight, and also no crowd and not kind of being on for it was a factor for him as well. So I wonder how it's going to affect the Dan Hooker that we see in the biggest spot in his career. I mean, let's be honest, the co-main event under Conor McGregor. What do you think is at stake here for Chandler and Hooker as far as the division goes, Dan? Because you've got these guys right under, Conor. It's not really clear who's fighting for the title next. And even before this fight goes down, there's going to be this press conference. And a lot of people may not realize this about Dan Hooker, but and I remember back in the day when me and Casper used to even do the events in New Zealand before anyone really knew who Dan was and he was still starting out, everyone would always say, this guy is kind of like the New Zealand Conor McGregor. Like, he's sharp, he's witty, he's always got something great to say, and his timing is impeccable. So just being on that press conference with those guys and then putting on a big performance for a guy like Dan, or even Chandler getting a big win, what do you think that means for him?
I mean, as you said, it's a marquee event. It's a big opportunity to really shine. Myself and the guys at BT, Nick Pete primarily has created this unofficial lightweight tournament, and that's one of the 4 brackets. Oliveira has already progressed, and we've got two of the bracket this weekend, and then potentially we've got Diaz going in there against Gaethje as well, which might be an exciting one. So, there's lots going on in this division, but I definitely feel like this is one of the 4 fights that is in contention for the belt or for a number 1 contender fight. Chandler was the reserve for the Khabib Gaethje fight, so that tells you what the UFC consider his limitation. I mean, they consider him championship material. Dan Hooker has got the opportunity to prove himself as championship material, because if he beats Chandler, then he puts himself ahead of him in the conversation and puts himself in another very interesting fight. He doesn't lose a great deal of ground because he's still young in his career, and these top few guys can play out, and Hooker can come through in the next 18 to 24 months. There's still plenty of time for him. And for Chandler, I don't think he loses too much either. There's always the octagon jitters and first time around in the UFC, etc. Gaethje had a blistering start and a rough finish to his first fight in the UFC. It doesn't always work out, but it is what it is. You just got to kind of learn on the job. And we've seen Chandler go through wars. We've seen him battle against UFC veterans and former champions. Eddie Alvarez and Ben Henderson are a great test of where his skill set's at. So I expect big things from him. He's definitely top 10 in the world. We just need to find out whereabouts in the top 10, and that's where it gets interesting.
And a tough test against Dan Hooker. Just quickly, Dan, as we wrap up, what would you like to see? Let's say everything goes to plan and Conor McGregor does beat Dustin Poirier this weekend. So many question marks about what's next for him. What would excite you the most in terms of what's next for Conor McGregor if he does beat Dustin again?
I mean, if this Nate Diaz Gaethje fight comes together, I think that'd be a really interesting one. I think Charles Oliveira is a tough test for anybody. I just don't know if that's, if I think about the UFC as a promotion, I don't see that as being a really sellable fight right now. So that's going to hold Charles Oliveira back. That's going to probably force him to get another victory over, maybe a Gaethje or a Diaz or whoever's in front of him. Maybe even a Chandler would be an interesting fight. Maybe he gets the winner of this weekend. I don't know, to be honest. I mean, McGregor's the one with the star power, but you've also got to consider the B side to the fight has got to be someone that's going to stir interest in McGregor and in the fans. That's why I think Nate Diaz is probably getting weighed in to move back down to the division. I don't mean weighed in for 155 either, although there might be some 1s and 5s in it.
Would it be a shame if he went to boxing after having a successful return for you, or is that something you'd be excited to see?
I think it would. I'm not really got any interest in watching him fight Pacquiao. I mean, there's just no consistency in it. I want to see him in the pool of the best MMA fighters in the world. Like, boxing for me now for McGregor is more of an exhibition, especially against Pacquiao. It'd be fun, it'd be interesting to watch, but that's kind of off-season stuff. Like, he's back in season now. We need him in the octagon, so I want him to stick around, and I would like to see him face. There's always the Nate Diaz trilogy. 155 makes even more sense because that's natural weight class for both of them. Charles Oliveira's the man. He's the one you got to watch out for. He's going to strangle the life out of everybody in this division. And he might be tailor-made for McGregor because he does kind of stand square and tall. But for everybody else in the division, I think he's a real problem. He's definitely one of the top two in my eyes for sure.
That's right. Look out for Charlie Olives. Another epic chat in the books, Dan. Follow the man on Twitter and Instagram at Dan Hardy MMA. I love the hot takes, the unfiltered hot takes, especially the stuff you do on BT Sport, which is amazing, and the stuff you guys chat about on Open Mat, which seems to get you in trouble every time. But we love it. We love it. We love seeing on Twitter the aftermath afterwards. But we appreciate the honesty in your opinions, and I think everything you say makes sense. You've also got the War Room, the best breakdowns in the game. There's Listen with Mark Goddard, and of course his book Full Reptile. Always appreciate, and the channel, Full Reptile, of course, with the Raptors. Always appreciate your time, Dan. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Always good talking to you.